Anyway, parliamentary committees are considering this week whether or not MPs that are accused of sexual misconduct should be banned from the parliamentary estate while the claims are investigated. It stems, by the way, there was an MP, you'll probably be familiar with it, who continued to attend Parliament whilst on trial for sexual assault. He was, of course, eventually found guilty. I'll come to you first, because you are indeed in the murky world of politics yourself. What do you think to this suggestion, you know, barring people from the parliamentary estate? And if you agree with that, at what point?
I think it's very dangerous, because what you've got to do is avoid giving opportunities for people who maliciously make false claims. So if it was simply a question of an accusation, I could get Keir Starmer out of the House of Commons for 3 months by setting up a false accusation. There'd be people who do that straight away. They get him out for 3 months. By the time it was proved wrong, 3 months would have been lost. And during that period, his constituents would not be represented and he wouldn't be doing his job. So I think the point of accusation is not the point at which people should actually be asked to step back. I do think, I don't know about the guy who was attending, but I do think when you get to the point that you're charged, you're probably not welcome on the parliamentary estate, and you should take time off and go and conduct yourself in your trial and prove yourself not guilty if that's the case, and you've got the right to do that. But I do think that it's very dangerous if you give people an incentive, malicious people. In addition, I'm not saying, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying the accusations that have been made so far are malicious or false, but I'm saying that you would then give an incentive to people to make false accusations. And that breaks a democratic bond and does a disservice to people who need the services and support of their MP.
I had a political editor on my panel once, not that long ago actually, a couple of months ago, whatever. Many people might have seen the programme. And he said to me that he is aware of lots of MPs that have been alleged to have sexually harassed members either of their staff or other people in and around that proximity. And I asked him, well, if that's the case, why don't you report on it then? And he said to me, well, I can't because I can't prove it. These people are not willing to go on record and they're worried about the consequences. So Daniel says at the point of charge, then these people can be asked to, you know, don't come on the parliamentary estate. But how do you get to that point of charge? Because Parliament has a huge power imbalance, right? So if I'm like, you know, like the office admin junior, whatever, and my boss is the all-powerful MP for whatever, you know, I would be a bit anxious because I'd think, oh, he's really powerful, no one's going to believe me. So how do you get to that point of charge if you don't have some form of ability to indicate that this person is under, you know, investigation or whatever?
In most workplaces in the country, there's a whole set of processes, HR department and so on, that enables some kind of process of dealing with these very complex situations, right? That is, as you're inferring there, often missing in the context of Parliament. You've got a number of policies and places that people can report things, but then you've also got a situation where you have MPs who are employing these staff, and there is, as you say, a big power imbalance there. And I think that it makes it very difficult for us. You know, you hear stories about the procedures or means of reporting not necessarily being massively useful, but then a power imbalance, a feeling basically that you will end up jeopardising your career in politics, your staff are often a bit younger, is a big disincentive to that. So I think internal to Parliament, there needs to be, and people have talked about this for a long time, a process of trying to create more structures so that staff do feel more supported, like they can speak out, and also part of a wider cultural change that does try to sort out some of these clearly quite toxic cultural elements within the context of Parliament.
I agree there's a cultural issue, but let's be clear, this power imbalance has been recognised in recent years very strongly inside Parliament, both in the Commons and the Lords. And I think you're unfair in not recognising that there have been structures very seriously put in place and compulsory training so that people can report confidentially. I don't think it's ever easy. It isn't easy if you're working in a factory or an office, because if you're complaining about your boss, you know there's going to be ructions. And that is true in Parliament as well. But I do think you should acknowledge the efforts that have been put in place to create these structures, which I think partly explains why there are so many more complaints than there used to be.
Yeah.
But if they were wholly effective, though, you wouldn't have a situation like what I had on here not that long ago, where you've got a political journalist saying on national television that he is aware of accusations and people that are behaving wrongly, but he can't stack it up. He can't do the story.
Yeah, but that's a different matter. You could have perfectly effective... Let's take an office environment. Nothing to do with the House of Commons. You could have perfectly reasonable structures with HR departments, people reporting them. But it's a very different thing to say, and I'm going to go and tell the newspaper and put my face on the newspaper reporting that incident.
No, but
I might be willing to report it internally, but why do I want the publicity of it? That's a very different story.
Because maybe your boss is a wrong-un, and he's not just doing it to
well,
you,
might
he's
want
doing
to.
it all over the place.
You might want to do that, but I think an awful lot of people would say, I will reluctantly, because it's all very traumatic, but I will reluctantly report this because I feel I have to, on my behalf and behalf of colleagues, to the system set up by HR and so on. I'll have that processed. But I certainly don't want this being on the front of the local newspaper. But it's a totally different thing, Michelle.
Well, you see, I must confess, I've never been sexually harassed in my workplace or anywhere, quite frankly. And if I was, then I think, and it's easy to say because I'm not in that dynamic, but especially as a younger person, if you're starting out your career, you've got to start as you mean to go on. And if you've got this old pervy guy or whatever, watch my language, if you've got this boss that's behaving in a way that's inappropriate to you, you have to. I don't know where you get your courage from, but you've got to find your courage. You've got to get in front of this and you've got to stop it. You've got to start as you mean to go on. But if someone is a mass offender, a serial offender, then they should be outed. They should be convicted if it's a criminal act that they're doing. And often the only way that you can do that is by making it, I don't know, public to some degree so that people can chip in and go, yeah, he's done it to me, he's done it to me.
The other thing is that in Parliament, at least, we are all, MPs and members of the House of Lords, are now under an obligation to report any behaviour we see like that in any other member. And if you fail to report it, we can be done for breaching the code of conduct.
No,
I agree. Laughing at
right.
that. We can be done for breaching the code of conduct as well. So I think I'm not defending the system as it stands, but I'm saying it's a lot better than you say. And I don't think that it's... I think there's a big difference between reporting something and wanting to have it dealt with and expecting the protection of your employer and the structure in which you work, and going off and tittle-tattling to a newspaper about it and seeing yourself on the front of a newspaper.
I mean, that obligation should have existed for over 100 years. I mean, it's a bit shocking that obligation only is there now.
No. It isn't. It hasn't existed in the formal sense that you could actually yourself get a formal punishment and a suspension for failing to do it. As a natural moral obligation of one person to another, it's there. But nobody's been in a position to enforce it in the past. Now you can.
But is my understanding correct that when you're employed as a staffer to an MP, you're employed by the MP and not by a wider organisation? And this is where the root comes, because your boss is the person that may have done that to you. In another organisation, your employer is the organisation. It is not that one person who the allegation may be from. And that's the problem. That's a power imbalance.
The complaint is not to the boss. The complaint is to the organisation, just as it would be. And it's the organisation that goes into effect to investigate the interaction.
The organisation being who? Being
the parliamentary body set up, and I slightly forget its name, the parliamentary body set up to receive these complaints and to investigate them on behalf of the Commons and the Lords.
But your contract is still, you as a member of staff, is still to the individual. It's not to the organisation. You're not employed by Parliament, right, as a body.
Yeah, I'm not sure this makes the biggest difference, as big a difference as you think. But you're right. You're employed by the MP. That's true.
Where do you stand on this? And it's very complex as well, isn't it? Because it branches out way beyond Parliament. Lots of this does. Because, for example, you will have been familiar with the cases in the past where somebody, I'm not talking about politics, generally I'm talking about now, a man perhaps has been accused of sexual misconduct, whatever. He will often get named, whereas the accuser is granted anonymity. And there's been lots of cases like that recently, hasn't there, which kind of always spark the debate. Where is anonymity? Where should it be granted? What's the right process and procedures to follow in these kind of cases? Give me your thoughts, GBViews@gbnews.uk.